To kick it off, did Japan choose you or did you choose Japan?
It's a bit of both, I think. Yeah, so I'm originally from London, England, and I've got a really kind of like diverse heritage. So I've got a sprinkle of German, so I think we've got a connection there. Swiss, Nigerian, Trinidad and Tobago, Grenada. So in a way, it's really interesting. Kind of my own story kind of reflects that story of Britain. And hopefully a more global future or vision of Britain as well. And I think one of, I guess, my image of Japan before coming was that, I guess, the typical kind of ideas, it's kind of very homogenous. But actually going to Nishio City in fairly the countryside, that was a big shock. But also that I found that Japan was really diverse as well.
Right.
This wasn't my original image of Japan, so I'm really glad that I was exposed to there, and that was kind of the start of me constantly challenging my own perceptions of Japan. My experience there, it was a kindergarten and also a home for the elderly as well. So in a way,
so you got both, the young and the old.
They're cradle to the grave, as they say. I got a really kind of the breadth of the experience of Japanese life. And I think it was that experience, the cultural immersion. So my original kind of goal was to come here and learn the language, but I also realized, especially for Japanese and my interest in pursuing Japanese studies, it's really beyond the language. It's those kind of, I guess, tacit forms of non-verbal communication, seeing the different cultural activities that were going on during the seasons. And I think it was that kind of, like I said, cultural immersive experience that made me decide that actually if I want to really pursue my interest in Japanese studies, I need to come back here and kind of go to university here. And that's, it was a no-brainer to me. So I went back to the UK to do a master's in Japanese studies. And I'd actually come back to Japan after that for a bit. For 4 years or so I was working in different sectors. So whether it's the public sector of promoting British culture is one type of work that I was involved in, and another one in an independent think tank doing research based at a British university doing a PhD, but I'm also here in Japan kind of teaching, researching and writing as well. Yeah.
You have written what I really consider the most interesting article on Japanese culture that I've come across literally over the last 10 years. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, you asked me about my PhD, and my PhD, firstly, it's not that serious. It's about laughter.
It's about laughter?
Laughter and humour, yeah.
It's about laughter and humour. What, I thought the English don't have a sense of humour. No, that's me, that's the Germans, right?
Rather than just kind of more direct forms of critique. It's, and laughter is really, or humour is really fascinating because it hits us on an emotional and deeper level. And I think that's why, like I said, humour and laughter is so powerful. It's even a bodily thing, right? When we laugh, it's literally this release of tension. And so perhaps they were trying to use this as a way of really getting people to rethink and get out of place with the mainstream of society, join them on the edges. Especially in the Meiji period, one thing that I'm looking at is how it transitioned from these, I don't want to say fringe spaces, but more of the artistic spaces into kind of the mainstream media, and that was the way that they tried to kind of expand their forms of engagement through, like I said, newspapers or books. They felt like they could reach more people that way, rather than literally having to bring people into kind of the artistic spaces. And sometimes even those artistic spaces were even a bit dangerous, right? During where maybe the government was trying to censor and kind of lock these down in certain...
But it always comes across as sort of, oh my God, the Japanese are more majime, are more strict and organized and regimented than even the Prussians, were at the time. But you're looking at laughter, and so you're looking at some of the sort of the popular fun of being alive.
Yeah. And I think I'm also looking at those on the edges of society, right? The outsiders, those on the peripheries who, from the peripheries, were using kind of whatever popular cultural type of forms of communication or forms of expression
Yeah.
to critique society at large. And I think that's one of the common threads which kind of run across my research, and that kind of now segues nicely into my other kind of passion work, which is looking at this genre of music called grime music in the UK, which is kind of a style of rap music which developed in the late 90s, early 2000s, mainly among black British communities, so those who are of West African descent and of Caribbean descent as well. Kind of before we go into that, one of the ways I came to Japan was my own interest in Japanese visual kei music, which is a style of
Right.
visual kei. Right?
Visual kei.
Yeah, so it's really popular in the 90s, and you have different, in the early 2000s, different artists. I guess famous ones would be like Gact and Larkin Ciel. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, and I think for me, why I was so drawn to it, it was a different form of expression and feeling,
Yeah.
right? That a lot of the ways of expressing myself in the UK, or expectations that were being placed on me, perhaps as a black male, for example, that I should be good at certain kind of physical sports type of activities, or I should be kind of like a street type of person. These types of like binary, very kind of binary or boxed ways of thinking, this was completely out of that, and I think I was kind of drawn.
So Japan, actually, this aspect of the pop culture actually gave you a route of escape, or
Yeah.
a route to express yourself.
Definitely.
Then you transitioned from glam rock to hip hop to
Yeah.
rap. I mean, how did that happen?
Yeah. So I think, so like I said, I've probably always had some sort of interest in the power of music, right? And that combined with my apparent interest in those on the edges of society, those who are marginalized, those who from that position try to critique the mainstream society or offer different perspectives, I think that has merged together in my interest in grime music.
Right.
What I kind of have shown with my own research is that its roots don't end within the African diaspora or the Black Atlantic. Right?
Yeah.
Its roots also extend not just into the past and not just across the African diaspora, but across to Japan.
Wow.
And across into the future even as well. And so its electronic sound, its futuristic sound, the form, its lyrical expression, all of these different attributes, Japan and Japanese pop culture has a lot to guide us
Right.
about the story of grime music and also Black British identity formation as well.
Yeah.
And it's again that story of, I guess it's a human story. In my article I talk about this concept of coldness.
Yeah.
Right? I call it cold Japan instead of cool Japan. And cool Japan again is often connected to this idea of Japanese pop culture, like let's think of Hello Kitty. Yeah. And even in the US, right, with hip hop music, I think they take a lot of that kawaii style, like thinking of Pharrell Williams and Kanye West, connecting with Murakami Takashi, the artist, and Nigo, the designer and DJ. They're taking a lot of kind of these cute elements, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas in grime music, and one of the key words to understand grime is cold, right? Because growing up, in the UK, the Black British experience, right, and a lot of the grime artists talk about this as being cold, meaning marginalization, not getting the same type of opportunities for upward within society, economic opportunities and different things like that, being told to kind of go back to where you come from type of thing. It's this cold marginalization, and the UK is cold and weather's shit and everything like that as well. So you can, they're wanting to make a cold sound. And when they were kind of playing with these different kind of Japanese pop cultural artifacts, like the video games, watching the anime series, they heard those cold sounds,
right.
That cold feeling was in those spaces.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
in the spaces of the Akira movie, where it talks about kind of this futuristic Neo-Tokyo post-apocalyptic world, seeing those visuals and those sounds, that reflects our own experience.
Wow.
So let's take that and use that as a form of making our music. That's what was going on here as well.
Wow. So, we've got this from cool Japan to cold Japan. You've got this feedback loop from Japanese popular culture, into the sort of black community, the black creators, around the world. Tell me, now that you've lived in Japan for a little bit, do you sense any sort of feedback coming back into the Japanese creators? Is that happening as well?
Yeah, I think that's definitely happening. I think on one level, you obviously have kind of the artists in Japan who've been influenced by different forms of African diaspora music, whether that's kind of like grime music in the UK or more popularly African American hip hop, and that's really been going on, I guess, for quite a while. Late 80s, 90s, 2000s. That's been happening in Japan. I think one interesting kind of development that I'm noticing recently is in the spaces of similar music genres, like trap, rap and hip hop, and also kind of like more hyper pop, which there's lots of electronic sounds and it's more eclectic in its expression. But in these spaces, you have artists in Japan collaborating with artists in Korea, in China, in Southeast Asia as well, and they're maybe using the streets of Seoul to film their music videos, or the streets of Shibuya. And what's interesting there is that they're kind of creating this new youth countercultural, you could even say kind of this East Asian identity, or kind of a broader Asian identity, which is really kind of, again, it's in tension with a lot of the kind of the macro level, or the state kind of international relations that's going on, right? And again, this counterculture of hip hop and rap is providing that form of expression and also belonging, relationality on a transnational level, kind of this non-state level, where they can, again, like I said, create their own identities, which is in tension with what's going on the state-to-state level in terms of conflict, or again, to use this word cold, kind of these cold relations between, let's say, Japan and Korea and different things like that. So I think that's a really kind of fascinating development in terms of that feedback loop as well.
If you had 2 minutes with the Japanese Prime Minister, here is 1 or 2 things that you should do to make Japan a better place, right?
Yeah.
What would you tell him in 2 minutes?
I think the first thing that I think there's a lot of focus on in these days about globalization of Japanese universities, and I think this is kind of a very kind of, I would urge them to think more about what it means to be a global university or future university in the 21st century, because as we've seen, whether with the pandemic, student exchanges suddenly no longer feasible, or in terms of just limiting to English, there's so many other forms of what it means to be global, right? And in the university ranking, so many critiques over what the university ranking is, right? And so these kind of goalposts, they may shift very quickly. So I think it would be challenging to think about the future of universities and what globalization is. The second point in the final minute, I think that will be in terms of thinking about my students, right? And one of the things that I often hear from them is that their time at university is one of freedom, where they can pursue their talents and interests and things like that. But then as soon as the job hunting, shukatsu as it's known in Japan, as soon as that comes in their 3rd year, they have to kind of bend and conform and contort their bodies literally into kind of the job hunting suits and dye their hair and things like that. And they have to contort their minds into conforming into the expectations of the different corporations that they're applying to. And I think that is really kind of stifling their creativity and their different passions and things like that. And so be thinking about how to best incorporate their creativity into the society. So I think that would be my final point of a recommendation.